Merry Meet, Annie here. I'm putting my video response into Evelyn Moon 91's wonderful video on Do I Have to Be a Fluffy Witch? Alysson, I loved your video. One of the reasons I liked it so much is your personal energy is one that is forthright and almost open to a sense of rawness with your emotions. And I think that's the place your power comes from. So I really enjoyed your video. I did appreciate the comments you were making and the way you had reacted to some of that incoming that came your way. I really appreciate that some of those we hold in our hearts as the kinder and gentler folk amongst us here, which I mean with great respect because I love so many of you. It was great to see your responses. It was a good reminder for all of us that we all have a center that we work from. We all have a place that our personal power comes from. And I really appreciated, I kept thinking of the word feisty, because it was my grandmother's word, and it was meant to be a compliment. If my Nana said somebody was feisty, it meant that they stood up when it mattered. And I really appreciated the feistiness in some of the responses that we saw today. It's an interesting situation for me because since I didn't have an experience in my spiritual background of anything to be considered light or dark or white or black, things that are those kind of separations and opposites, everything in the way I was taught in my life experience has been that at every moment in our life it is all. So I haven't had that experience of having to classify something as light or dark or bright or shadow or any of those things. So this has been an interesting insight to me for some of the growing and developing that goes on within our pagan community, and how identities and the source of each of our unique powers can be, even though we may be similar in a lot of ways, can come from a very different place. It was a good reminder of how unique and powerful we are within our own sphere of power. Because just as I see you, Alysson, with that power that I see as you, as what you bring forth, and just where I see your presence is in your honesty and your directness, and therefore I would assume your ability to focus. As I also saw in video responses, the other places that our friend's power comes from. I'm always left a little confused when I see people make comments, or I hear people make comments on YouTube about a perceived lightness of being a Wiccan. And that's always a lesson in patience for me, and a lesson in humility, I must say, because I get my dander up. I don't understand where that comes from. I have experienced over the recent years folks who have read about Wicca in books and tried practicing some of the things that they have read in books have a feeling that even my way is limited in somehow, fluffy in somehow, that it doesn't embrace the entirety of life and all the challenges of life. And it brings me up short, and I want to get on my high horse and say, what Wicca have you been reading about? And then I stop and think, reading about on the internet, or seeing videos on. Because I find that the religion is not accurately represented in 90% of the places that I go. Books always concern me when it comes to Wicca. And I say that appreciating that most of us, it's our only way to learn about it. But most of those authors are out to make a buck. We are their livelihood. We support them. And the people who come to them have often come from a religion that they have given up, usually the religion of their family, and they're looking for a safe haven. They're looking for love and acceptance, looking for a feeling of personal empowerment. They're looking in a sense for kindness they didn't find in their prior religion. And these books tend to feed on that. Even going back to the earlier books, they tend to feed on the feel good and making you feel good. And I think there's a point at which the seeker needs that. That place of safe haven needs to be created. But I'm never seeing, very rarely should I say, am I seeing the balance in neo-pagan writing about Wicca that represents the religion in its totality. I still remember the night of my initiation when I stood at the edge of circle, that I thought I was young, maybe still a little bit naive, and I had an agonizing time getting to that point because I had been a very abused and hurt person, and I had a lot of things to deal with to bring to the edge of that circle that night, and I thought I'd done my work very, very well. And in a way, I was just, my heart fell when my elder said to me, the death you experience here tonight, if you are living in right relation to the gods, you will experience every day the rest of your life. Now it's proven to be true. A friend of mine told me one time that when we know where we are spiritually is when we have the greatest hurts in life, the greatest challenges. Where do we turn? We may turn inside to ourselves, to our own deep, wise, and knowing selves, but we will also turn outwards. And it's, as she said, what name do we call forth when we reach outwards at those times? It's an embracing of the totality of our lives when we do that, that there will be great moments of joy and there will be absolute moments of total agony. I realized about 15 years ago that there was a big gap in the perception of Wicca from the way I was trained and the way my teachers and mentors and peers taught me when I was first coming up and the way that it has been presented in books. And I remember one public ritual I had been asked to help get together. And it was a wonderful group, and the ritual, by the way, ended up beautiful. Their energy was fantastic and their energy raising was fantastic. But we were in the planning stages and we were talking about what was going to be done for Beltane. And there was a lot of plan on raising the pole and the ribbons and the drumming and what music would we use and, oh, the bonfire and the feast and really the party that you often think of course, is a great part of Beltane. And they planned a wonderful way forward. And then I put on my priestess hat, I guess you could say, and I said, what about the solemn aspect of Beltane? And I had 30 pairs of eyes stare at me like, what are you talking about? And so I used the example of the god standing at the edge of that clearing with all that commotion that they were setting up that we're going to mimic in our ritual. It was all there, and he was being lured into it, being called by the goddess, come and join me. And yeah, he knew that he'd have a lot of fun, but he embracing his own death. Every turning of the wheel has the beauty of creation and the beauty of destruction and chaos as part of the turning of the wheel. None of that seemed to have been something that these 30 delightful people had picked up from the books that they read. I talked to a coven mate recently about the fact that those who come to us who have studied books and not had experience with others yet don't seem to have the balance. They seem to be focused on what makes them feel safe and comforted and loved, which is so powerfully important. But it kind of stops there for a lot of people who have studied the path. And she and I have an idea that those books that are written, the livelihoods we contribute to every time we buy one, it is more difficult to address the work of energetic chaos, of emotional chaos. Not as the dark side as opposed to the light side, but there is that aspect of who we are that is not as simple to welcome. And perhaps it's not easy to put into words, and therefore we don't see a lot of that in books. My friend was telling me that when she made her first steps out into public pagan community, that she felt that she was being belittled because she was Wiccan. Not something she expected would happen. Broke her heart. And I have to tell you, when she made her way to our circle, she was as powerful in her abilities and her magics and her spiritual beliefs as any of us. in great part because there had been great sadness in her life, and she had reached into what she had learned from these books, and she had found the other places, the places that deal with sadness and loss and destruction and insecurity and all the things which are part of life in addition to the kinder, gentler aspects of it. And our conversation was around that that was not in books. That was something she was led to because of the trials of her life and what she reached into and out towards. She had been introduced to it in the books that she had read, but she really hadn't picked up anything from the books on how to deal with the challenging, the darker, as some are prone to call it nowadays, aspects of life. We're not talking about light and dark in the sense of our witchcraft and our magic. We're talking about life, which has its moments of every shade of white and black and in between. So I've been thinking those thoughts as I've been able to watch the varying posts to this and the power that each person puts out there that is their own personal power, and we've learned a lot about each other from this. I've learned, again, remember tolerance. Remember to keep your heart and your mind open to the experience of each other being each other and what each of our unique abilities and powers are. And also, I'm reminded, as it's happened a couple times since I've been on YouTube, that when I see remarks that obviously are made about Wicca from those who have learned of it in books and have only taken it to a certain place and don't understand the breadth of that religion, it's a good reminder for me to suspend judgment. So many opportunities to judge another if we're not careful. I've learned in my time of being more publicly pagan that the names don't mean anything, that someone who says they're Wiccan, I may not have anything in common with. I may find, like my friend, my coven mate, my sister, who had her experiences totally through books, but when we met, we were in the same place. We believed the same things, we did the same things, but I've learned not to make any assumptions, and reminded again through this series of video responses to Alyson's wonderful video to do my best to learn from another what that other is and not allow myself to react to something that's surface. We've seen the depth in these video responses of the kinder and gentler among us, and we've seen and been reminded again that those of us who have a more assertive or aggressive way of being, who work with the agent of change and chaos a great deal in our life, that we are all experiencing in a way the same thing. And at different times in our lives we make use and experience different combinations of those powers. The powers we hold personally and the powers we mingle and mix when we're with others. I really, really like these videos that I'm watching, and I just had to put my own 2 cents out there. With a little bit of a poor me, a little bit of a whine that I do sometimes get weary about those who know nothing about the true aspects, the deep aspects of the religion I hold so closely and cherish so much, who make light of it. And I remind myself, just because we don't know any better, it's no different than when I make an assumption about someone else, based on the few facts I know. Good lessons to be learned from these video responses. I know, Alysson, you said you weren't expecting so much in the way of response, but it's been one of the better series of video and responses that I have seen in my time on YouTube. So I appreciate what you said, and I think Rita said it too, that something more than that line that we leave as a comment on a video can be a very powerful thing because there's an exchange, and indeed it feels more like community. I know after this week, and I know there's still going to be some more responses to this, I'm going to know people so much better. I'm going to feel closer to them because of that. It's just been a really good series of videos for me. I really benefited from it, and I wanted to honor in this video that I really appreciate the honesty and the beauty with which these responses have come out. I wish you all mirth and reverence. Merry part.